Good morning, and thank you to everyone who is here. Um, I'm grateful to the current treaty holders of the land that I'm on, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and I'm grateful to be able to live and work upon this land as a recent settler, student, teacher, and researcher. My presentation today is titled Being Good Wives and Ideal Citizens, Experiences of Indian Marriage Migrant Women in Canada. But before I begin my presentation, I want to mention, because my work is about the transnational movement between India and Canada, I want to mention that there is a situation of immobility right now where flights from India and other South Asian countries like Pakistan, flights from there to Canada have been stopped. And this is because COVID-19 is at the moment surging uncontrollably in India. And the governments in India at the national and provincial level have failed miserably at providing aid or infrastructure or relief to the citizens. And of course, the situation is located in the larger context of a global vaccine apartheid, where in February, only 10 nations had administered 75% of all vaccines administered. In February, the Indian government had indulged in vaccine diplomacy, where they were shipping AstraZeneca vaccines to Canada. And this was widely celebrated by Indian, particularly Hindu diasporic groups in Canada. But these shipments will be ceasing now because it's high time for the Indian government to be taking care of its own citizens as well. And I mention this now because, like I said, the transnational links between India and Canada are a central feature of my work, and these facts have been just like my reality for the last year and last 2 weeks. So yeah, that's where I'm at. And I'm very happy to have heard from the other presenters here about COVID-19 as well, because these conversations are very important and very much present in our lives right now. But my presentation today draws upon a chapter from my doctoral dissertation. So my research focuses on transnational experiences and decision-making processes of Indian marriage migrant women in Canada. First, by looking at how women deal with changed educational and labor expectations. So there's a lot of connection with Catherine's presentation just now. Labor expectations both in the public and the private sphere. And secondly, understanding how is it that women access community support and networks in the diaspora, especially along regional and caste-based lines. So my presentation today is framed around 3 stories featuring 3 of my respondents. And I do this to center their embodied experiences in illustrating the themes of my paper, which is 1, how transnational state borders regulate migration and how community norms around marriage regulate practices of gender. And what does it mean for Indian marriage migrant women to be good wives and ideal citizens? So I'll start with a story from my interview with Saira. So as our interview was winding down, my respondent Saira asked me if I was married and what my plans were for after my PhD. Now, Saira and I are the same age, and we had shared our experiences of studying and living abroad on our own. And we had been talking candidly for an hour. And so when she asked me this question, I told her, I'm not married, and I vaguely hope to be in India. I hope to be closer to my parents, but I'm open to going where the job market takes me. So then she responded to me and said, oh yeah, it's best not to make too many plans. You never know, because you'll have to go where your husband is. And what if you meet someone here in Canada and you both get jobs in Canada? It'll be easy. You'll have a PhD. You'll be the biggest brain around. Now, this statement has stayed with me ever since our interview. My upbringing in India was infused with the understanding that marriages for women in India do involve spatial mobility. After marriage, women are expected to live with their husbands, which is the patrilocal norm, or with their in-laws and their husbands, which is a viri local norm. In fact, the largest internal migration within India is comprised of women who move after marriage. Scholars have argued that, quote, brides are the epitome of the permanent migrant, end quote, for women in India after marriage have to take on what they think of as a different subjectivity when they move from their natal household to their marital household. Sometimes it involves being called by different names as well. While this is a majority norm, I want to note that this is not uniform. It's not universal across India. There are many communities, particularly indigenous and tribal communities in India, that don't follow these norms. In fact, have matriarchal or matrilineal forms of organization and post-marital kinship organization. But coming back to what Saira said to me, what was really striking was that she allowed for the possibility that I might meet someone here. And this was not what she had done. She had entered into an arranged marriage. Arranged marriages can be understood as marriage between a man and a woman within acceptable parameters of class, caste, religion, region, and language, and decided upon primarily by the respective families or with their involvement and approval. The flip side of these are love marriages or marriages of choice that transgress these bounds, particularly those of caste, religion, and sexuality, and these marriages that take place without parental or community approval. Love marriages are considered less than respectable, inferior, more fragile, and overall a threat to social organization. Late last year in India, parts of India had passed laws that criminalized interreligious marriages that were punishable by imprisonment, just to give you a sense of the censure that love marriages face in India or face under the current government in India. And so, though Saira herself had had an arranged marriage, she allowed for the possibility of a love marriage for me. But as you can see in her quote, the patri-local norm was still explicit and unchallenged. The second thing that was interesting to me is that Saira thought that with my advanced degree, the PhD, the Canadian job economy, which is oriented towards a global knowledge market, would be my oyster. If I decided to stay in Canada with my Canadian degree, I would have no problems at all, according to her. And so her words evoke this fluid sense of crossing transnational borders from India to Canada, but while upholding specific gendered norms that limit my agency and mobility. And so these are the sort of themes that I'm exploring in this paper. And with an intersectional and transnational lens, and my paper, as I go on, will look at how Indian marriage migrant women strategize migration with their spouses when they are dealing with not just Canadian immigration laws, but also these community norms. And in this paper, specifically, I'm going to talk about women who lead the migration process and subvert the patrilocal norm, because they're the ones who decide where they're going to live, and how they experience this on a familial, social, cultural, and governmental level. This slide just sort of gives a little snapshot of pertinent migration facts and trends in Canada. What's important here for me is to note that in the last 10 to 15 years, marriage migration, which is part of family class immigration, has been consistently de-emphasized in Canada. Part of this has been anti-marriage fraud campaigns, which focused on migrants from India and China. The idea being that people from India and China were entering into fake marriages in order to defraud and enter into Canada through the immigration system. So while family class immigration has been de-emphasized, economic class migrants have been preferred. And this is within the paradigm of high-skilled migrant workers. So there has been temporary labor migration for what we now understand as essential work, but that's not been considered for settlement or permanent migration. This has also been accompanied by an increase in student migration, especially international students. So being one myself, I can tell you that we pay very high fees, and international students account for a huge chunk of operational revenues of colleges and universities, especially in Ontario. The upshot is basically that the economic justification of immigration in Canada is that the admission of highly educated and self-reliant immigrants would make Canada economically competitive, while at the same time remaining self-supporting during periods of economic upheaval. And so the requirements of permanent residency application of spouses as principal applicant and dependent require a combined total of points based on education, language skills, and work experience. And so there is a vision of a conjugal unit here, where both partners are self-reliant, independently skilled, and what scholars have called quote unquote designer migrants, who meet the specificities of a neoliberal nation intent on productivity, cost recovery, and immigrant self-settlement. So this is the context within which I'm talking about marriage migrants. So for my project, for my dissertation, I focused on qualitative in-depth life history interviews with should be 25 women. I accessed them through snowball sampling. And because same-sex marriage is not legal in India, all of these women were in heterosexual marriages. The majority of my respondents were Hindu. They were over 30 years old and they arrived in Canada within the last 10 years. They belonged to the middle class in India and were highly educated as well. But once they came to Canada, they experienced downward class mobility and de-skilling as well. 45% of my respondents came as spouses or dependents of their husbands, but 55% led the migration process as permanent residents or students. And 75% of them had arranged marriages and 25% had love marriages, or which were in the case of my sample, intercaste or inter-regional marriages. Krisha was one of my respondents who led the migration process. She had studied behavioral psychology in India. And when she graduated, there was a huge demand for qualified professionals in this field in the US. So all her fellow classmates had migrated there. Her father kept asking her when she would migrate because he saw that as a return on his investment in her studies. But she wanted to get married first. When her marriage was arranged to her husband expressed an interest in migrating as well. And so, owing to her educational qualification and professional experience, Krisha was the one who led the permanent residency application process. In general, I found in my research that where women led the migration process, they faced resistance from their families or their communities, and they had to present their decision to migrate as serving the family's interest. As she told me about her husband, Krisha said, he left it all behind. He left behind this great job because I had the opportunity to migrate. Now, who does that? Tell me. His friends, his relatives all dissuaded him, but he still agreed. Now he really struggles here without a single friend. He works a minimum wage job in shifts, and we barely see him during the day, and he's losing all his confidence. End quote. Despite being the leader of the migration process, Krisha herself had not found suitable jobs in her profession, and she had had to enroll in an Ontario college for reskilling and to gain Canadian educational experience. But she minimized those challenges. She minimized the burdens of housework and the care of two children, saying that she was managing. But her big worry was that her husband's changed demeanor and inability to adapt to life in Canada was what she wanted to talk about. She worried that she had failed her husband as a wife because she was the one who got him to migrate. She was not alone in this. Many respondents viewed their husbands' decisions to migrate as secondary applicants or as spouses without jobs in hand as a sacrifice of their place in the established social order. Despite leading the migration process and their personal struggles and successes, they assumed responsibility and guilt over their husband's perceived failure to flourish in what was supposed to be a move for their advancement, for their upwards mobility of status and well-being. So my argument in this paper generally is that the onus seems to lie on women to reconcile the expectations of the husbands and families and communities with those of the Canadian state and the economy to achieve those immigrant markers of success. One of my few respondents who had a love marriage was Falak. Falak and her husband dated for years before their parents agreed to their marriage. So Falak wanted to migrate to Canada to advance her career, and she had changed her trajectory while in India. She had moved towards IT-based jobs so that she would have an advantage on her permanent residency application and in transitioning to the Canadian workforce. Her husband wanted to migrate, but he didn't plan or prepare in the same way. So due to her professional experience and her superior English language testing scores, Falak was the primary applicant. Once they arrived in Canada, they had a period of culture shock and depression, but Falak worked hard to find a fulfilling job in her field. She reached out to all her contacts, she set up meetings, and she found a job that she wanted to do. Her husband did not even seem to try, and he instead started driving for a cab service. He blamed Falak for their isolation, for his failures, and for the migration processes in general. And soon their marriage was strained. So even though Falak herself exhibited the qualities of the self-sufficient and competitive migrant worker citizen that Canada seeks, these qualities did not guarantee her or her husband a successful integration into Canadian society or a family life that conformed to her expectations. Now, near the end of my interviews, I would usually ask my respondents what advice they would give to newcomers or people who wanted to immigrate to Canada. And I got lots of interesting responses here. And in Falak's case, she advised this hypothetical newcomer that, you should not blindly trust in your partner. You never know how people change in a new place. Counseling can help people adjust, but both partners have to be willing. I feel the government should provide it along with all the career services for newcomers, end quote. So by suggesting that newcomer and settlement services for immigrants should include marital counseling, Falak demonstrates how women struggle to reconcile their roles as good wives and ideal future citizens. When there is an absence of established community support, which is something all new migrants face, and when they have subverted the patrilocal norm, and therefore there is an additional burden of guilt or responsibility on them, women seem to turn to the authority of their new home, Canada. And they seek to bring the Canadian state into the responsibility of ensuring that they, as new immigrants, as future citizens, as individuals and a couple who are the designer migrants, that the Canadian state also bears responsibility to help them sustain their marriage as that conjugal unit. So by way of conclusion, I hope this presentation sheds some light on marriage migrant women's experiences, not just at the public and transnational level, but also how they experience migration, the complexities of that experience within their relationships, especially when women led the migration process, as I spoke about. So my work does explore further the strategies that they use to navigate being good wives to their husbands and good daughters and daughters-in-law to their communities, as well as good model multicultural subjects of the Canadian state. My argument here is that when especially they've subverted the patrilocal norm during migration, the onus of achieving this migrant and marital success takes a toll on the women themselves. So with that, I'm concluding. Thank you to my respondents and to the organizing committee of this conference. And just to also mention, there has been a lot of really important mutual aid initiatives that have been taking place in India to basically make up for the infrastructure shortfalls. And if you can, please consider donating to citizen groups in India. I'm happy to put a link in the chat, or please reach out and I'm happy to direct you to resources. Thank you.